your presence as a teacher can actually legit save lives if things go bad. I had a kid bring a gun to my classroom to use on another kid in that class. And when you start to realize after it played out, the kid got scared when security called, they got a tip, but I was up there, and the kid, when he got caught later, he tried to run out of the building. They got him. Security nabbed him before he got out, said that my pacing as I taught took away any clear shot he would have had.
Welcome to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I'm your host today, Carrie Purcell, founder and CEO of AudioLife Memoirs. And today I'm joined by Ben Tomes, or Coach as he's also known. We're going to hear all about his life, his successes, maybe some failures too, and really we're just going to learn what helped to form and inform the person he is today. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to speak to you today as well. We've had a brief intro, so I know a few things that I'm interested in learning more about, but there's so much that I don't know. And I think we're going to start at the very beginning. Okay. So, I sometimes like to start with a question that goes way back, just kind of getting to know where you came from, who you are. So my first question is, can you start by telling us where you were born, and is there a story behind your name?
Not so much, I guess, with my name. It was a relative that I had never met. But I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We didn't live there very long as a kid, but I was born there. Both my parents had grown up in the Milwaukee area. So that was where I happened to be born.
Okay. And what was childhood like as you grew up? So it sounds like you moved probably fairly soon after.
It was pretty weird.
Okay.
I can't, it's funny, especially having ultimately worked in inner city environments and seen what bad looks like. I can't call it bad, but it was definitely bizarre.
Okay.
We moved a lot, and, my dad was a school educator, but he rode the ranks up from teacher, then quickly to an administrator. And I remember enough of him loving his job, then hating it.
Yeah.
It stuck with me as a future teacher. I didn't really want to go into administration. I saw it kind of lose its luster for him a little bit with that. But, he was gone quite a bit when I was young. So my poor mother had 3 kids within about 4 years. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't have been any more scramble-headed or hyper and taken any more advantage of that scenario than we could have. It was a different era. I was born in 1972. So it was pretty standard, like if you were home from school for the day or whatever, even if it was bitter cold, you were outside. You went out and left to wander and go take care of yourselves. It was much different than it is today with the kids I raised and have seen for years. Like, you're not quite so quick to do that, but we were out and about, and it was probably necessity because we would have overtaken that house if we were given the opportunity. So it was... My mom really kind of, I think, and dad struggled with a lot of inadequacies. And I think they kind of found a way to alleviate some of it through religion. But I would argue, how like when you see a family that goes and falls under the prey of alcohol or drugs, you kind of tend to stop thinking that that's maybe the only thing that can run rampant through a family and maybe cause harm. And religion is great when it's not being free-based, and it was being free-based at our house.
Wow.
My parents didn't need drugs or alcohol to fuel weirdness. I think religion kind of did a lot of that. So by the time I was in 3rd grade, we were in a Quaker church, and I spent that time in a Quaker church until I was maybe a sophomore or maybe early junior in high school, and it didn't go real well. I don't have terribly negative thoughts about it. I think the general message was overall pretty good, but there was a willingness to kind of run with and believe like the movie Gremlins was going to, fueled by Satan, and that the occult was behind it, and like those types of things. And I saw more, I think, stuff taken out of context by the people at the church than I really remember being given by the people in charge of it. But I was an avid reader and had pretty severe ADHD as a kid. And it was going to be stuff that if you were going to force me to read it, I was going to do some of my own research. And some of that did not jibe with the stuff that I was being told. And so I kind of learned early to separate a little bit, but I don't think a lot of people get that opportunity. We were fortunate in that we moved quite a bit. And the participation in that church was quelled a little bit when we moved 2 hours away. But for the first 6 months, we went every Sunday and drove 2 hours to get to church, which then lasted for 3.5 to 4 hours, then to do an hour after, and then to drive 2 hours back on a Sunday. So you can imagine with 3 teenagers with pretty strong ADHD and all, a year or two apart, we're not probably having it real well. So it led to some rebellion, and there was some pretty good rebellion. So.
Oh my gosh. So there's so much in that introduction you just gave us. There are several threads that I'm going to pick up on. But I'm going to try just for this first part to keep it to those early days. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned one of 3 kids. You have 2 siblings. Mm-hmm. What are you the oldest? Where do you fit in that?
So I'm the oldest. I'm also the only one that really never left town.
Okay.
Or that left town. The other ones did not leave. They kind of stuck around. So I'm the only one that actually kind of branched out and moved away and did other things. So as you become an adult, that actually can cause some other additional dysfunction because you're not there to deal with some of the stuff. But I definitely felt pretty confined by the small town environment that I grew up in. So I branched out.
So, and when you say the small town environment you grew up in, you also mentioned that you moved around a lot. So was it with several small towns? Was it kind of the same? Yeah.
Very much. So my dad climbed the ranks as an administrator. And so in Wisconsin, it's different. They have single city school districts. Whereas like in a state like Florida, where I've worked, it's county school districts, which provides you a lot more opportunity without having to quit to climb a ladder.
Yeah.
So because of that, we were bouncing when he got his degree. We were in Wausau, Wisconsin for 5 years from when I was 3 till I was 8. And then we moved to Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And don't be fooled because where I grew up, they don't sound like I do right now. It's the Wisconsin accent's a thing. You'll hear it come back and be just a little bit, but that small town Wisconsin accent is unrivaled. I have friends that sound like they fell out of the movie Fargo. You just can't almost believe that there's actually accents like that out there. But there's parts of it I loved. We were in Wausau for 5 years, Sturgeon Bay for 5 years. And then we moved to Waupaca, Wisconsin, which is really small. And we were there for 2 years and then moved back to Sturgeon Bay. So I had the chance to go to school with kids for 5 years, leave for 2 years, and then finish up high school with them, which was a unique experience to kind of go and have those 2 super formative years out and then go back. Because I was an entirely different kid by the time I went back. I had been pretty quiet and compliant. But there was a storm brewing in my 9th grade year in Waupaca. We got really bored. And the one thing I learned, boredom is my mortal enemy. So, or best friend, one way or the other, boredom's going to get a reaction from me. And Waupaca, its natural state was boring, but the friends I made, we made sure it wasn't boring. So we were kind of a roaming group of scrambled dregs, I guess, just kind of like going and doing whatever. And especially now looking back with ADHD, I clearly had ADHD, but I had it before anybody knew what ADHD was. Yeah. And so people we got to slip through cracks on things and everybody just kind of, well, you're just a real prick, or you just don't listen, or you don't behave. There was a lot more going on. And what they've really found now is unmet intelligence at an early age leads to a lot of that. And as much as we were easily led astray, a lot of it was still, even if it was really bad emotional intelligence or figuring out how to get away with certain things, you're still seeking intelligence, even if it's not on a traditional scale. So I look back, it's been interesting careers for the kids that I first started to misbehave with. I went into education and became a teacher. And when I say misbehave, I mean genuinely dangerously bad things. We stole a circus bus at age 14 from a local carnival called Tip Top Shows. And as you can imagine, as the 14-year-old boys might be the least intelligent form on life, at least in how to process what you should and shouldn't let out. So, 3 of us, I was 85 pounds. I was tiny.
Yeah.
And I was with two friends, and we just kind of wandered a fence late at night and found a bunch of equipment with keys in it. And
Oh
so
my
we
gosh.
planned this for 2 or 3 weeks, a sleepover, and went back and stole that thing. It was an old short bus. So you think about the irony of what we took.
That's true.
And bailed out the back of it and cut across a golf course, tearing it up, yelling "for" out the window, thinking it was the funniest thing ever. And we could have gone away for the rest of our high school career for what we did, just taking that out. And we got away with it because as much as we were scramble-headed, we could think quickly. And we were able to communicate with it about a few minutes warning. Well, we had a pact. No one was going to talk about it except to a couple friends. But it was too tempting when we got back to school. We told everybody. I mean, a 14-year-old kid's not going to keep that quiet.
Yeah.
So we get back, and we didn't realize that the owner's nephew was a grade ahead of us. And so he hears the rumor, and we're called into the police station. Thank God after... So it was a twice a week, or it was a once a week newspaper town. So you got the newspaper out on Tuesday. So the story had hit that there was a short bus stolen. So we were able to call each other with about 5 minutes, no cell phones at that point in time. What are we going to say? You got to fake cry and say we read it in the paper and that we're just pretending we wanted to sound cool. So we managed to, with literally the conversation that quick, go back and get taken to the police with our parents, and all of us managed to stick to it, and we ended up not getting in trouble. But real funny, years later, my mom, who never spoke of that again till like 10 years later, I was home visiting from college, and out of the blue, unprompted, "You stole that bus, didn't you, when you were 14? We knew it, but we didn't want you to go to juvie, so we didn't push it."
Oh my gosh, what a story.
We did legit dangerous stuff. Like, I could have easily been locked up. And I know going future into education where I had to work with kids who had done bad things, it gave me a huge bit of grace with kids who had done some things, because I saw like firsthand how easy it is to fall into doing some of those things. And not really even intending to be a part of it, or really realizing or grasping the weight of what you just did. So it helped me gain a lot of empathy as I became a teacher. And my other friends that I did that with, one of them is a longtime police officer in Indianapolis, and works undercover in some gun cases. And so he managed to go and parlay that in. Another one became a mortuary specialist and owns his own mortuary. Another one works in high-level finance, and one of them's no longer with us. So it was just a very, very different dichotomy of what directions we went in, all very interesting and of note. But we were also the losers of that class. And so, when I was in that school for my first 2 years, I was in so much constant trouble. To this, like, in trouble in Spanish class, we got caught egging the teacher's house. I mean, it's pretty bad.
So a couple of things. When you said, "I won't believe what, how the kids that you misbehaved with turned out," I was not expecting so much success, really. So much, we have police looking for order. We have educator. We have business owner. We have, finance. Yeah. I was not expecting that to be. So that's an outcome that, lucky for you, wasn't railroaded.
No, it could have very easily been. I look back at that all the time. As much as I can laugh about it now, it's terrifying, and it helped make me a better parent and everything when all that stuff came, just because I knew I was kind of forced in the shadows to go do anything fun. And so, we were it was only getting more and more alluring. My parents, who were so against drinking, drugs, and sex in particular, which, if you're going to go and make a crusade against those three with kids in the late 80s, it's going to end with you going into fields to learn how to drink. And that's what we would do. We would get, 3 or 4 kegs between 2 or 3 schools nearby, and you would go experience your fun, if one way or the other. And for my mom, who liked to condemn us to Hades if you engaged in any of those big 3, once you've checked off a couple of those boxes, it's kind of like, well, if that's gone, if my salvation's not able to be redeemed, well, here, like, I'm going to go try this or go do this. And so I'm actually also fortunate on that front that I never got into any like big drugs or anything. So even working in cannabis now, that wasn't until I was late into adulthood. So, I was fortunate that I, kind of kept it limited, but also because we did it in the shadows, we were drinking and driving all the time.
Yeah.
And so you look back and when you have to hide everything, it just leads to bad.
And Wesley, just out of curiosity on a little tangent, so was the drinking and driving a kind of a necessity in small town? You didn't have another way to get around, or was it something else?
It was a combination of both. I just think, you're young and you just think, well, I won't have a problem with it. And truthfully, people, like, I'm not just by no means encouraging people to do this, but there were friends of mine and people who were so reckless that they were worse if they weren't drinking because they at least had something to go, oh, I better not do that because I could get in real trouble if I get caught. And again, it doesn't mean that they, as adults, that especially changes. And if anything, like there were a couple of cases where I watched where like being real, like they were probably less dangerous because they were at least being cautious. Whereas otherwise, some of the times we ran away from police and everything that busted up parties. And you look back, you're like, oh my God, that could have also gone really, really bad. And I wanted to make sure when I had kids that my kids could come to me and go, hey, I want to try this, or I'm going to do this. And so if you could have the conversation beforehand, even if you don't like what's going to be said, to be able to have that come up. And I kind of learned it through what you aren't supposed to do. I learned how it shouldn't work. And so I kind of just reverse engineered it from there.
Wow. Okay. So before we move forward into career, kids, both as a father and as an educator, and later on your business now, we'll talk about all of that. But I just want to pause, a little bit. We're sort of in your teenage years. You talked about a couple of lots of things, and we'll pick up on them, but a couple of things I want to return to right now. So one is, those few years where you moved away, it was transformative for you. You came back as a completely different person, in your words, which is a really interesting experience on both sides. You talked about boredom causing some of this, but you also talked about, you referenced rebellion. I don't know if this is what you also consider as those rebellion years. And there were other factors, including religion, church, that led to that. And I'll call it sort of strictness on your parents' perspective of what life should be like. So is this the rebellion that you're talking about? What was it like when you went back? Fill us in on that.
So it's funny because I kind of got moving away and then moving right back. I had a chance to kind of go and restart, and I was a quiet church kid. And then with a small school, like you get stereotyped pretty quick. Yep. And my dad was an administrator at the high school and I was in the middle school. So that even kind of locked me in a little bit more. And then we moved and he took a job out of the school system for those 2 years. So I was able to go and be like, well, now Dad's not going to be in the building like he was going to be before. And I do feel like I didn't at the time go, I'm going to go rebel.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like a conscious decision, but clearly there's no way I could look back and go, no, that was pretty tinged in deliberately wanting to go and break free. When I got back, I had also grown a little bit. I was a tiny kid. So I was an 85-pound freshman. So the last time anybody had seen me in the one school, I was like 80 pounds. And I wasn't huge when I came back, but I was definitely not a full-blown, little kid. I was now like 120 pounds. So I was huge. So, but you grow up just enough so that you're not really so easily categorized. And that church really didn't continue to thrive. So my parents didn't go back to it. And at that point I had drawn enough where it was, even if we had to go, it was more like, all right, well, we're going to make you go, but then we're not going to make a huge issue of it. Even though they would at times, they'd pressure you to go, but it really kind of lessened just enough so that wasn't stoking it. But I got back to where my old friends group was. And I had definitely been a peer, and I'm still super close. I'm very fortunate for kids with ADHD where making friends can be hard. I made a core group of friends in middle school that I'm still close with. And, also have now a very different group from who I had been hanging out with, but went into but it was very much expected that they would go on and do well in life. And it's funny because as we've stayed closer, I learned that there was a much more of an appreciation coming towards me, living kind of vicariously through me. Kind of, I was doing the fun stuff and they were pursuing stuff that, they kind of felt they were obligated to do. But rejoining them, I definitely was the court jester. So now, like, I was not the peer so much as I was, and it works for the I guess the dynamic of that friends group, and it's been funny over the years. Some of them are, one of them is the president of Palmer Johnson Energy. The other one runs the nuclear power plant in Kalamazoo. You're the guys who've gone on to do big time things, and they're also showing up at my events and things that I did, and so I was fortunate to get that, but they partied. So then even if it was, I might have done some additional misbehavior with other friends, they were still fun to hang out with. And, we were throwing parties at, their parents' basement, and stuff like that. So they were willing to go and kind of toe the line a little bit. And I definitely could coerce them into doing some things every now and then that they might not have done. But it's very interesting to go back and see where people kind of go to and what they advance to. And when you move a bunch, you get to see a real dichotomy of people and going, God, they still made it, but completely different situations. And you still made it, but also completely different situations. And I don't know, it just kind of fascinates me to see where we all went, in particular because nobody's bingo card did me teaching ever exist, or having quite, I think, the success that I did as a coach. I mean, that would have been hard to foresee, but the teaching end of it for sure. And even as an athlete, I wasn't a dominating athlete, even so to have a major coaching career, I think probably was a bit surprising. But I also know that not much I've ever done is surprising to any of them. So, one way or the other. So I kind of learned to leave.
You burned that early. You shocked them so much that nothing else was going to be a surprise.
Yeah, pretty much. I just lean into it now. It's like, when I fought at age 49 and they were all there just kind of looking at me and still laughing, because it's like we were almost 50 and they were 50 and looking at me like, you're still going to go find something to go do that's going to go. And it's interesting to see how to make sure that you're not bored. Although it sounds, you've throughout just our conversation so far, there's so much wisdom, so many learnings, so much insight that you've brought back. I don't know what it was like as you were living through it, but I can hear it now. And I think I want to pick up on several of, I do want to, I'm dying to get into your career, but let's just talk for a minute about part of you kind of understanding your childhood path today is being able to identify that ADHD was a big part of it, but it wasn't named at the time. It wasn't recognized. So when did you get the label? What did it feel like, not knowing what the reason was that you were maybe reacting the way you were, or that you couldn't handle the boredom, or that you were maybe, some of those reactions you were having? What was the experience like? When did you have a name for it? I had gone to college and I struggled to get accepted anywhere. I had a 25 on my ACT, which I was hungover for when I took. And so I didn't take it seriously at all. And but my GPA was a 1.9. So cumulative. So, I wasn't attracting a whole lot of college attention. And even though I was an athlete, I didn't have a career that would have done that. I went to college at University of Wisconsin, River Falls for a semester. And I dropped out at the end of the semester. I did join the wrestling team, and that actually, for the short amount of time I was there, had a profound effect on me later as a coach, because I finally really worked under somebody who I really, really respected. I had some other good coaches, but he just commanded a different level of respect. I didn't demand that level of respect with him, though. I wasn't his favorite athlete, but I adored him. And I learned a lot in that short time, but I dropped out after a semester. I was woefully not ready to be at a four-year college. So I went back home, just briefly. My parents said, you could stay with us. You have 30 days. Say 30 days to get a job and get into a place. And it was cold, but it worked out for me. I can't really say it wasn't a good decision, but I at the time, I didn't know how to take it. And so I did that. My dad had started to work at mental health clinics. And so he was a manager of them. He went from administrating schools to then doing that. And he wanted me to talk to a doctor that we had known the family for a while. My dad took a job working for him. He was a psychologist. And he wanted me to come in. He's like, hey, there's this thing called ADHD now. And it was 1991. So I'm just home from college. I dropped out. My dad kind of nudgingly, hey, maybe you should come in and do this index. It sounds an awful lot like it would explain maybe why school was such a struggle. And so he did, and I went in, and I was on those early tests, I was off charts with it. So the label was there. I can't say I did a whole lot with it, though. It was kind of neat to know, all right, well, maybe there was some type of a reason that I was so squirrely, but also it was having gasoline thrown on it by being so bored at home and other factors. So I can look at it. I definitely had it and still do. And I've gone through different phases of kind of dealing with it. I didn't really address it, though, until about maybe the year 2000 is when I started to actually really look into doing something specifically about it. And I look back, I can go and argue and see, oh my God, doing that definitely helped. But also there were some things that I was able to do that I look back now and go, how, without having taken that seriously at all, how could I have done as well as I did? And one of them is I got a perfect score on the reading portion of the teacher's exam. I'm a skim reader. I'm going to lose interest on super, super big details. I got to skim everything. And somehow I managed to pull that. I also took a Wonderlic test and had a call come back asking me if I had cheated, and it was for a job. And I wouldn't have known how to. It's just a quick reaction, quick thinking. Yeah. I lost a lot of that. I feel like when I started to treat it, but I was able to channel it better and do things that were more wide ranging and more productive. And so I don't think it means that one is terrible and one is great. I think it is misdiagnosed quite a bit. I also think it's over-medicated, but I've also known kids that if they weren't on that medication, were going to end up in some really, really bad trouble. And kids that should have been, that people were so resistant and you could see them spiral downward and would have probably benefited. So I don't really subscribe to one camp is terrible, one is great. I had benefits from it, but the ADHD is... So that I had enough stories and I can look back and go, God, that was tinged by that. Oh my God, that's exactly why. So I put out books. I put out 3 books called Confessions of the Unmedicated Mind back in 2012 to 2014. And I've got one more. And I separated them like it was a disability report. So there's one version is play, one version is home, one version is school, and one is work. And so I still have play to put out yet. It's almost done. Where I just kind of went through and you can see where even as a little kid, there were signs. They look at my brother and I got kicked out of we went to college together for a year and a half when I went back later. And he got kicked out. I helped. We got kicked out of the petting zoo at our freshman orientation at Carroll. I was 21 years old at that point. So I look back and, it's like we were playful and we hadn't done anything about it yet. But so you can see like even as we were like 19, 20, 21, I go, yeah, that probably had its say in that day.
So interesting. Thank you for all of that.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy, or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
I'm going to follow for when the 4th book comes out, because what an interesting way of documenting and categorizing and thinking about it. So let's pull back a couple of things. You had your first semester at college. You went back home. Your parents gave you 30 days. You said it worked out in the end. Where did you go? What was that gap between that and getting back to college, where you were just telling us about your, going with your brother for a year?
I did what any other 19-year-old Wisconsinite would do, and I moved into a trailer.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
At a local hotel, they had like some cheap trailers you could rent by the month. So I did that, and I bounced job to job to job. So I worked at one point making wood hulls on ships. I worked at an ice factory. I worked at a Pizza Hut. I would get bored with something, and none of them paid very well. And it was, $5 an hour. Loyalty is going to be pretty low.
Yeah.
So I bounced around. What did have the most profound impact on me ever was moving home and dropping out of college. I was watching my younger brother, was an exceptionally talented athlete and a very, very good wrestler, but we didn't have good coaching at that school. And because I had gone off and seen what good coaching looked like, and it being at another school where I had much better coaching and I was getting my last 2 years, and I now knew how to quantify how bad it was and knew he had zero chance of making it as far as he could. And I never qualified for anything really. So, I was above average, and that was about it. And I didn't want him to have that same fate. So I felt like I learned quite a bit in my one semester of college wrestling, and I already had a pretty good knowledge of the sport. And I came back and volunteered as a coach. And then I ended up getting a weird set of circumstances after a year of volunteering. So I was still 20 years old. I get hired as a paid assistant because they had an opening, and one of my former coaches, who I adored, he was an assistant, so he didn't have a lot of pull in running practices, but they wanted him to take it, and he passed on it so I would get hired. So I got paid to coach at age 20, which most schools won't do. If you're under 21, they don't want you on a coaching staff. And I can understand that now. And let's be clear, I burned that principle. Mr. Grimmer, who I nicknamed the Grim Reaper, and I had not endeared myself to him, although my dad had worked with him. And so, but then there was a gap. So he knew me when I was little, but I made his life hell my last 2 years in school. So me going back and trying to get that position and get it paid took a leap of faith on his part. And even with that, I sort of played Russian roulette with it a little bit. I still wasn't responsible enough to make great decisions. I had to avoid getting a drinking ticket. That was one of the stipulations, and I would be let go. And then I got a drinking ticket, and I defended myself in court, and it got dismissed. So I was this close to having it all blow up.
Wow.
But early in the season, so it was a really, really little bit of time. I was angry because I didn't get hired initially to get paid. I ultimately did, but the season was about to start, and one of my friends that I stole the bus with when I was a kid killed himself, committed suicide on Thanksgiving, which is in the very early part of wrestling. And so that happened. And so I, at that point, decided I wanted to just get myself into something. He also had dropped out of school. He was a really talented athlete on a scholarship in, the Big Ten. He's a talented wrestler, and, really never got any clarity on why that happened. It caught us all by surprise. But what was becoming clear is I was watching guys my age kill themselves pretty frequently in small towns in that 18 to 21-year-old gap. You can't go out to bars. Not that drinking is that important, but at least you're around friends where they can see you and stuff like that. And that really hit me. So I decided to go into coaching at that point. And so I ended up going into coaching, and what had opened up was the head coach had blown his knee out. He couldn't do it for that season, at least at practices. So at 20 years old, I became an interim head coach.
Wow.
And so I got to run the practices. And I was working at an cleaning floors third shift for just an asshole. Sorry if I'm not supposed to swear, but just this really, really, really decrepit guy. And I worked with third shift cleaning floors so that I would have the time to coach. Did that season, and we had the best season in school history. We had 3 guys go to the state tournament. We never had more than one. We had 2 of them place at the state tournament and get into the semifinals, which in Wisconsin, it's not a normal event. It sells out arenas. You have to there's scalp tickets outside of a wrestling tournament. People don't realize the following at that level in some states is pretty big. So we were on a huge stage, and got 2 guys to place. One of them was my brother, and he wasn't supposed to make it. He scored a takedown at the buzzer against the defending state runner-up, and that propelled me. like that win made me go, oh my God, I'm actually good at this, and have now led somebody past something what he was never supposed to do, and long past what I had done. So it really made me realize I think I could go into this as a career. And so that in that time frame, I still wasn't 21 yet. I didn't turn 21 till after that, but I made the decision to go back to college at that point. And when he got recruited, because he had placed at the state tournament and was being genuinely recruited, I didn't intend to go to school with him, but I definitely I'm going back to college. This is going to have to happen. Made the decision to compete in college, even though I had been out for 3 years and wasn't all that great in the first place. But I had coached, and coaching makes you better at what you're doing. And I was beating up on one of our guys who placed at the state tournament and was heavier than me. I'm like, maybe I've gotten a little better by coaching. And so I went back to college, and my brother dropped out after a year and a half, even though he's the big star recruit. I ended up going with him when my college plans fell through. I got accepted at the same school, so we suddenly were impromptu teammates. He left after a year and a half, and 4 years later, I had started all 4 years and turned into an okay college wrestler. Like, I was never supposed to do any of that. So, I think I was 60 and 49. I was like super average, but I did it for 4 years, and I learned so much. And I was essentially another coach on that team. I was the oldest guy on the team my freshman year there. I was 21, which means you can buy the beer, so everybody likes you. And in Wisconsin, that's everything. So that was what really led me to go back. And I was very fortunate. I couldn't get into state schools because of my GPA, but Carroll accepted transfers with a 2.0, and I got 3 C's and an F in my one stint. So they dropped the F and let me transfer in, and I got into a private school I shouldn't have probably been at. And had a blast while I was there. Had more fun than you should have in a 4-year college career. Lived in a party house, threw a ton of parties, and learned so much about people and how to deal with people that have had too much to drink or don't behave right, whatever. You learn to do party economics. There's all these things you pick up. And so I definitely had a lot of fun. I did a radio show. I went to Russia, spent 6 or 7 weeks in Russia, spent a week in Kazakhstan as part of that trip. So I've seen where Borat's from. If you wanted to know if it was as wild as they portrayed it, it was. It was definitely a unique experience. But that decision to go back and just to stay committed, because by the time I was done, I was almost out of money. I was turning 25. There was a change in financial aid law at that point. And so I wasn't going to be able to student teach and have it covered under financial aid as I was turning 25. So, I'd been in college for 4 years. I walked away with my history degree, but still went into education. And, I didn't take the hardest major in the world, but I had some amazing professors, and they worked out some really neat opportunities for me. And with the Russia trip, the generosity I got from one absolutely impacted me as I went forward as a teacher and a coach, especially of kids from just unbelievable poverty. So it set me up. I wasn't going to be able to afford to go to the trip to Russia. It was my sophomore year, and I was a starter on our wrestling team, and I didn't want to miss a chunk of the season. And I was off to a really good start, so I didn't want to give that up. And he was like, listen, what if I can work out a wrestling team for you to go, and I can help you get it paid for, will you go? Like, you help me pay for it, and you get me a team to work out with in Russia, which is the top wrestling place in the world. Wow. You can work that out, I'll go. And he got me a spot with the national team, and then helped pay out of his pocket to cover it for me. Said, after you graduate, come pay me back, And that type of generosity stuck with me. He wanted me to experience this. It was so exciting to him, but he just wanted me to go get that experience. And it turned out to be a really life-altering experience altogether. But the generosity he gave me then definitely propelled me forward. I'm a big believer in, if you've had that happen for you, or if it's negative and happened to you, don't let it happen to other people. Go share your experience. Go find out what you could have done differently. And that definitely played a part when I went into the career that I did. But at the moment when my brother won that match, I knew I was going to go be a teacher and a coach. And so I walked away from a very good young team and went back to college, and then kind of had an interesting experience there. And I was in the Milwaukee area at that point. I decided while I was in school, I wanted to go into urban education. I felt like I was in Russia and I got along with people. And even though that wouldn't necessarily seem like it translates, if you're an American, you're a minority in Russia, and they can all tell. They can all tell you're not from there. Yeah. It's how you dress, even, not just your accent or how you speak. They can look and kind of go, they're not from here. And when you realize that you're comfortable enough to stand out where you're the minority, it just kind of made me go, but there's this huge need in teaching. And I know I didn't get the education or the coaching that I necessarily should have. I had some great teachers, for sure. But I didn't really have anybody who was well prepared in how to handle that stuff. It didn't exist yet. So I went forward after reverse engineering education for me and coaching and going, what didn't work? Yeah. And what do I want to change? And if I want to make change, where do I do that? So I made the decision, and I go back to, as much as I'm not a fan of religion right now, I got a lot from the stuff that was imparted into me. And the Quakers were very good about being concerned for the well-being of others. They always have been. Mm-hmm. So whatever issues I have with that, I definitely carried that forward. And with seeing Milwaukee nearby as a school district, I wanted to do my student work there, but my college wouldn't supervise me there. They didn't want anything to do with it. So I had to go out of my way to get student placement. I went into the city of Milwaukee and got placed at an urban school. I got it worked out and they approved it. They just didn't want to have anything to do with setting it up, which also stuck with me later because I found that to be kind of absurd and really of probably negative reasons. I don't know if you know much about the Milwaukee School District, arguably the worst in the country. Statistically, Milwaukee is the most dangerous place in the country for Black males to grow up. There are a lot of statistics. It's had one of the highest recidivism rates, not just for students, but for people in general there. The school system has been failing for a long time. And so for me, I was like, I've got an S on my chest. I'm gonna go. But I really felt passionate. Like, if you want to go to do this to help others, you should go where they need you most. So while I was there, I definitely made a commitment to doing that, got a little bit of student work in that, but wanted to go and carry that forward. So when I was wrapping up with college, that became a goal of mine, to get hired in the inner city of Milwaukee.
Wow. So incredible journey to get there. You mentioned, I think twice now, that you were able to reverse engineer what did and didn't work for you in education. Were there some key takeaways that you can share with us that you knew this is what has to change, this is what I can do differently?
Mm-hmm. I was able to look at the way that my previous coaches used practices, and there was too much talking, which is ironic because I'm a talker, but there was too much talking at the practice. And it was also like slow and not repeated on an expected time frame. So it was like, here's a move, go do it. They might walk around and see if you're doing it right, but there was no stringing together of things. So I realized right away, you needed to go and make everything. They needed to know how to do it quickly, and without having to have it memorized, to go and instinctually know what to do each time. So I had been able to see contrasts of what worked and what didn't, and borrow certain parts of it. It also was not well timed. So even at 20 years old, on instincts, I knew we didn't peak correctly. We never had a peak. They would just kind of coach the same way through the whole season, and then the last 2 weeks of the year, we would go super hard. That's not how that's now, especially having coached for years. I know my instincts were 100% correct. You can't do that. It just wipes you out at the end of the year. So I went back and created something that eased you in and worked insanely hard as you just kind of built up, almost like the whole concept of boiling a toad to death. Like, you haven't even realized how much work you've done, and like how the fun that was there slowly phased out. Yeah. And so I was able to take that stuff and to go and reverse engineer practices for kids that were engaging and move quick and repeated the same stuff that they needed to know, and then like break all that down. I was able to do that pretty young, even before having really truly wrestled collegiately. My instincts were really good on that front. Now, there's some things I definitely did differently as I got experience, but that formative thing was something that became a core of what I did. And one thing that stood out for the future of my coaching careers, I got almost wrestling's hard to get immediate results in. It's a sport you start when you're normally 4 years old. And I was having to start with kids both in that job and then later with that hadn't done it much before, or certainly were never good and trying to get results right away. As a teacher, absolutely reverse engineered classes that didn't work for me, because if you were going to be boring, and God help that teacher if you were boring in a subject I liked, like history, because if you were going to make me not like it, I was going to make that class mine as a student.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm like, why did that not work for people? So a few things. One, condescension. If I was spoken to in a condescending manner, even if I didn't know it was happening, it elicited an immediate negative response. And I've watched, in particular, in culturally diverse schools, people make those mistakes routinely, and they don't know why somebody is upset with them. And it's like, it's not the words, it's kind of how you said it. So I made sure that didn't come up. But I also made sure there was never any downtime that wasn't filled with things, and I made it interesting. So, like as a teacher, I started to really go, would I want to sit through this? Would I be engaged in this? And how can I go and do this in a creative way and really turn it into an art form rather than just I'm repeating this? So I would make changes year to year. And it took me, it sounds like I nailed it right away, it took me at least 3 years to get super, I guess, I wouldn't say functional. I was functional right away, but like where I really felt like I knew what I was doing. Yeah. And then it took probably about another 3 or 4 years to really get good at it, where it's not repetitive. You're able to just kind of handle things. And, I saw something the other day that said teachers on average make over 1,000 decisions in a day, which is really, most of them really little.
Sure.
But you lose sight of some of that. And I just created something that I knew it, wouldn't be putting people to sleep. If I wanted it to be interesting. And I also wanted it to be a happy environment, because it's funny. If you talk to some teachers, you'd have thought I was a different human being. Like you couldn't have been talking about the same kid. Because for some teachers, if I knew that they were a decent person, they treated me with respect. Even if I sometimes goofed around, I was going to behave for you. Yeah. Like if I was engaged. If you didn't engage me, I might like you, but it's not going to be an easy class. And I wanted it to be different than that. I wanted kids to look forward to coming to my class. Yeah. And I feel like as a teacher in the long run, I definitely got that. I didn't have a kid removed from my class for over 10 years. Like they felt like I could handle all of it. And this is working largely for a bunch of that. Not all of it, but with kids with, emotionally and behavior disabilities. And I was fortunate that I was able to carry in an understanding of that, but the ADHD also made me a better teacher. I knew to go, don't do this for 30 minutes. It's 10, 20 minutes, maybe work on it for a bit, kind of keep it moving, keep it interesting. And so I kind of built that in. I rolled tech in early because I thought it was interesting. So even years back, we were doing some pretty neat tech projects and things like that in class. I definitely on those two fronts did what didn't work. And I started to apply that in life. If you saw what didn't work, then don't repeat it. And one other thing I picked up as a coach, and this is where I think a lot of coaches, and not just coaches in sports, people in general, they look for the people who nailed it and then they copy it exactly. And that can be good, but if you're in a competitive field, you're never going to catch them.
Right.
You're like, they're already better at it. They're ahead of you on it. If you do it that way, you're not going to catch them.
Yeah.
So my thing was, I got to catch you. This is like, I'm starting way back here as a teacher and a coach, because with the urban system in Milwaukee, whether it was skills in class or it was wrestling, which they had never seen before, and I'm trying to get them to be good. Yeah. If I did what they did with those kids, you're never going to catch them. And in both education, this is now early 2000s at that point, it was legit competitive. They made schools compete for money. And so if you were at a school like Custer High School in Milwaukee, which literally received all the kids and teachers that the district had passed on. So it was a tough atmosphere. I loved that school and working there, but it was definitely set up for failure. And so for me, taking those situations, if I was going to advance it and I copied somebody else completely, then I'm never going to pass the ones I need to get ahead of. So I borrowed ideas and actually went to the state wrestling tournament after my first year and took notes on what every good team did as a habit. And instead of taking it and go, we're going to copy all those habits, I created an offense that would go and work against all those habits.
Interesting. Yeah.
Rather do that than and do something that they aren't ready for.
Yes. Yeah.
And that we prepared for them that way, rather than go, well, we're going to do all of this. Well, you're not going to pass them if we just copy that. So I think that approach was pretty unique. Yeah. I definitely, even collegiately, I worked for 2 coaches who greatly contributed for how not to do things. And so, when you're able to carry those things with you forward, it makes for so much better production, because you know where people are going to fall into the traps. You know when to stay away from some of those things. And I felt like that really worked well for me in my career. And you don't realize in today's world, and it was like this in 2002 when this happened, your presence as a teacher can actually legit save lives if things go bad. I had a kid bring a gun to my classroom to use on another kid in that class. And when you start to realize after it played out, the kid got scared when security called, they got a tip, but I was up there, and the kid, when he got caught, later he tried to run out of the building, they got him. Security nabbed him before he got out, said that my pacing as I taught took away any clear shot he would have had. And when you hear that and you go, wow. And I had coached that kid a year earlier, or 2 years earlier, as a football player. He didn't play anymore, but I also had enough rapport with him that as much as he hated that other kid in that class, he didn't want to hurt me enough. So when hearing that is like pretty eye-opening. Yeah. When you go home that day and realize kid brought a gun to my class to use on one other kid in the class. And it's so I carried a lot of that stuff into my education career and, reverse engineered from there, because I knew it didn't work for me. And I figured that challenged school environment, it couldn't be a whole lot different than how people could have gone and had success with me. And I also remembered exactly what worked. And it was mostly how I was spoken to by teachers. It was if they were funny, and I felt like even if I didn't do well with them, that I had their respect. And didn't belittle me or talk down to me. Or in some cases, if you could scare me, that also could work. But I carried that into one lesson I got that was so amazing. One of the funniest things I ever got was there was this clunky white guy teacher, he was a retired teacher, and I would say probably about 70 years old. And he would come in as a sub, and you'd hear a commotion amongst kids when this guy was in the building, and he would come in, named Jules Smith, and he would walk up to the kids, and he could speak their street language fluently and would do it. And the thing is he wasn't making fun of it. He was basically buying his way in, because there's something inherently funny about a 70-year-old white man who knows how to do the handshakes, who goes and can go and speak the modern lingo. And I kind of carried that with me to go keep kids not just entertained, but to go buffer and to go prevent fights. Because you hear 2 kids getting angry, and suddenly the white teacher goes, if you don't stop it on a G, I'm going to go and call you. And you say it kind of silly. It kind of buffers it because they know it's a joke, and it takes the focus away from when they're angry. But I carried a lot of that stuff in, and I watched for what did work and add what works. I just think you got to go and sometimes go and take how you learn not to do it and go, all right, we've got to go and find a better way and kind of fit what was there. So.
Yeah. Wow, what a great answer. So thank you for all of that. Thanks for listening to part 1 of our conversation with Benjamin Tomes. Stay tuned for part 2, where we go into his chapter as a father. We talk about marriage. We also talk about his career in the mixed martial arts and UFC. There's lots more to come. See you next time.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.